Dear listeners, welcome at yet another episode in this fourth season of the Meet the Expert podcast series. And in this series, together with well-known experts from around the globe, we explore challenges and opportunities in the pig veterinary world. And in this episode, we will stay away from bacteria, viruses or parasites. And instead, we're going to look at management matters. And with us today is Professor Emeritus Larry Firkins, attached to the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign in the United States. And we've agreed to just call each other with our first names. So I would say, welcome, Larry.
Thank you very much. I appreciate this opportunity to be with you.
Well, we appreciate it as well. The Meet the Expert podcast series is a co-production of Boehringer-Ingelheim Animal Health and Pig Progress. And my name is Vincent de Beek, editor of Pig Progress, and I'm the host of today's episode. And present at this podcast is also audiovisual editor Iris Hofman, and it will be a duo presentation today. So hello Iris as well.
Well, hi Vincent, thank you for having me by your side today. It's an honor. I'd like to tell a bit more about our guest, Dr. Larry Firkins. He is the former Executive Associate Dean and Professor at the University College of Veterinary Medicine. Prior to joining the university in 1995 and serving as the Director of Research Stations for 6 years, he spent 9 years as a partner in veterinary practice in central Illinois. So before we start talking about management and employee retention, shall we set a scene first? Larry, when we are talking about companies and their employees, what do we have in mind? Is that farms, veterinary practices, feedlots, integrations, or maybe all of them?
Yeah, thank you very much. It really works for all of them because we're not talking about a specific entity of raising pigs or raising cattle or being a company employee or working for an individual. What we're talking about is how do we deal with people? The people are the thing that unify us across the various issues or various organizations that you talked about. It's how do we lead people? How do we develop people? How do we leverage our work so that we can get the results that our company needs at the same time that we can retain our individuals? So that's the area that I think everything that we'll talk about during this is applicable to all the various entities that you listed.
I see. So it's everybody in the whole swine industry, pay attention what you're going to hear. It's important. Excellent. I happen to know for a fact that you've been giving multiple presentations inside and outside the US about the topic of employee retention. What makes this topic so fascinating for you?
Yeah, it's really become my passion. To be just completely transparent, developing people, leadership doesn't come natural to me. My fallback is that of a dictator. For numerous years, it was because I said so, or because I was in charge, or because I had a positional leadership. I had a title. And since about 2008, I've realized that there's better ways to do that. I think the thing that attracts me to employee retention is some companies get it right and just flourish, and others really struggle. I think the phrase that our success or failure is dependent on other people is really what applies here. If we have a company that is in a constant flux of turnover, we're never going to hit, if I can use the reference back to swine, we're never going to hit that parity number that most of our employees are in 3 to 5 parity. We're always going to be turning over the employees. And a lot of the companies I work with, a lot of the organizations I work with, they say it's a recruitment challenge. And I ask, are you increasing the size of your business? And that's why you need to recruit more staff. And it comes down to almost 90% of the time that it's a retention issue. The response back is no, we have to replace the people that are leaving. So not to be a smart aleck, but in those situations, it's not a recruitment issue. It's a retention issue. And it's if we bring them in the front door, but they're leaving out the back door quicker, that's the issue we need to address. Not how do we recruit better, but how do we keep people in place? The joy that I get of seeing individuals advance, and that's one of the things I've enjoyed as a professor for 29 years, is watching a veterinary student come in the door as a first year walking them walk out as a fourth year, and then getting to interact with them during continuation and continuing education and seeing the growth that has taken place. So it's an area that I kind of laugh and say I'm a one-trick pony. And some of my colleagues say I'm not qualified to call myself a veterinarian anymore because I don't deal with health issues. I've had enough experience with cattle and pigs that I understand how those organizations function and what the goals are and production and the metrics that we hit. But I'm brought in to work on the people end of things. And I found that very, very satisfying.
Could I ask, what did it take for you to realize that you had to change something in the way you, direct people?
Yeah, great question. It goes back several years to about 1995 or 1996. I was placed in charge of two of the research farms associated with the University of Illinois, one on campus and one down in southern Illinois, about 200 miles away. I had very little training for managing people. I'd spent my entire career up to that point being trained to be a veterinarian, and then being a veterinarian and learning how to diagnose, the treatment, but more importantly in our profession, the prevention, so that the next group of pigs, we wanted to, make sure we took care of this group of pigs, but it was equally important to make sure the next group of pigs didn't get exposed to this same situation. So when it came time to managing people, I was literally named, the director of research stations, and the next day I had two staffs I was in charge of. I brought things home. I brought frustrations home, and I've been married for 43 years. And my wife is my biggest fan, but also my coach. And she said, seeing how frustrated I was, that I needed to figure out how to do this better, or I needed to go back to practice and go back to where I was dealing with a relatively few individuals in the situation. I was fortunate enough to get to do the Master's of Business Administration program at Illinois. And a couple of the classes there dealt strictly with organizational behavior. How do we deal with people? How do we deal with the leadership aspect? And I learned there's better ways to do things. Mm-hmm. And then in this process, and so I took my wife's advice and got better at what was necessary. And it doesn't come natural to me, but it also doesn't give me an excuse to be a jerk or to bring that stress home. And I found that I wasn't alone in that individuals in management roles, that maybe we take an individual who was really, really good at the conception rate in the breeding and gestation barn, and then we promote that individual to be in charge of the other individuals. And usually they have a really good conception rate because they're an introvert, because they focus on the specifics that are important in getting that sow to conceive. And then we say you're in charge of 7 people or 17 people. You're in charge of a budget. But we don't give them the same training that we've given them when we brought them in and developed them for an AI technician. And so I try to fill in some gaps that we have some unrealistic expectations sometimes, that because they're good at one position, now we're going to promote them to management. Yeah. But we don't give them the same training that we gave the individual when we had more of a technical aspect to their career.
Exactly.
Great question. Great question. Thanks for asking that.
You're welcome.
If I go back to the title of this podcast, it is called Why Employees Stay. And Obviously we could have also chosen for the title Why Employees Leave, but I felt we had best opted for a positive approach. Mm-hmm. Doesn't mean that we can't touch upon epic fails, I think, but what I'd like to do is to cut the podcast into 4 chapters with hopefully a lot to learn and some positive takeaways. So Perfect. First I'd like to look at staff, and after that I'm looking at the angle of companies, and first perhaps we could look at things definitely that went wrong, and then how things can be done better. So after every chapter, the listeners will know what to do and have plenty of ideas, I think, how to kind of make their business better. Mm-hmm. If we start with the staff and look at unhappy staff, basically, do you have a couple of ideas or a couple of examples what may abhor employees in particular? Do you have examples of things that went horribly wrong?
Yeah, I unfortunately I do, but I guess I wouldn't have a job if that wasn't the situation also in this area. I think the number one thing that I run into is to put it in a phrase, the video does not match the audio, that what I say is important or what I say we're going to do, then I don't do that. And that sends a signal to the employees of, I don't know what to believe. Is it what Larry says or is it what I see him do? And that is a situation where we create confusion.
They kind of tell you, okay, these are the biosecurity rules, and the next thing what they do is don't change their boots when they walk from one farm building to the next.
Because they saw me not change my boots when I showed up on the farm, or I just walked through the shower instead of showered and got into their clothes, or I told them how important it was that they couldn't bring equipment from one farm to the other without taking the proper procedures, and then they see me take my equipment from one location to another. So that video match in the audio is just extremely important. The other thing I see is employees are overwhelmed initially. I have some companies that I've experienced with when I talk about their onboarding program or how they develop employees, they say, we have a sink or swim attitude, that we throw them in the deep end. And if they don't prosper, if they don't survive, literally, then we know they're not for us. And when you think about it, if you're thrown into the deep end, one of two things is going to happen. You're going to drown, or it's going to be a traumatic experience before you make it to the side. And there's a book called Do Hard Things by Steve Magnus that I really have enjoyed reading and putting to work. And he said we should align our expectations just above the current capabilities of the people we're working with. So if the goal is to get them into the deep end of the pool, we start literally in the wading pool. And then we go into the 3 feet and then the 5 feet. And we teach them how to swim. And then we teach them how to dive instead of just throwing them in there. Companies that follow that approach are very clear on what the expectations are. And I get some pushback when I talk about working with employees of, well, you're just coddling them. I'm not. I never lower my expectations. In 29 years of teaching, I have never lowered the quality of the deliverables, the assignments. And the students will hit those, but I make really clear the first day, this is what we're going to cover. This is what the expectations are. And then I don't vary from that. But I've changed the way I teach based on the change of the people and the students. And I think that's applicable to the employees also, of if they're overwhelmed, if they don't have the technical knowledge, the operational knowledge, they'll lose the emotional aspect. And is work draining, or is it something that you get energy from? My days still go really, really quickly, and I'm either really inefficient at what I'm doing, or I just really enjoy and get into a zone with what I'm doing. I have several conference calls yet today that I'm going to do with individuals that I'm working with that want to get better, or with boards that I'm working with that we'll talk about what we're going to implement, and then they'll report back, okay, these are the obstacles we ran into. Okay, let's talk about those. Was it a resource issue? Was it an unexpected obstacle that came up? Or was it a lack of training that we need to deal with? So I think that's the biggest thing that I see is they're overwhelmed. They get confusing signals of this is important or this isn't important. And then we just don't do a good job of training them and making those expectations clear. And people get frustrated.
That makes perfect sense, I think.
Yes, absolutely.
I have a couple of more things that jump to mind, but I think I'll save them for the next couple of chapters, because I think it's more appropriate to talk about it when we're talking about companies. So we've had things that make staff terribly unhappy, like the wrong signals all the time and being overwhelmed. That's good examples. If we turn it around, employees that stay and that are happy, what do employees value in a job?
Yeah, and number one, I want to make sure that you know how much I appreciate your approach on that. We have exit interviews all the time with people leave to find out why they leave, but I don't think we take advantage of learning why people thrive within our business. And one of the things I think with a staff that is satisfied is they understand what's expected of them. I cannot hit the mark if I don't know what the target looks like. And so that regular feedback, that encouragement that coaching of helping me get better. So when I meet with employees, when I meet with managers, I have an 80-20 rule. And 80% of the conversation has to be things that we can still impact. I want to learn why things went well or why we need to change some things, but I only want that to be a maximum of 20% of the conversation, because I don't want to continue to relitigate everything as to why something went wrong. Let's learn from it. Mm-hmm. Or why something went right. Let's learn from it. But I want to talk about what we can still impact. And I think that has a positive impact on the employees. The other issues that I see, and I think the pandemic really has had a big impact on this, is employees are really looking for a position that will give them a sense of purpose. Why do I get out of bed in the morning? Why do I continue to support this company? What's the mission of this company? And do I believe in the mission of this company? Not the mission statement, not the vision statement. Those are important, but give you an example. My father passed away from the disease Alzheimer's. I saw it just have a tremendous impact on him. The mission of the Alzheimer's Association is a world without Alzheimer's. Mm-hmm. I can relate to that. I can remember that. I can support that. I'm sure they have a mission statement that may be a page long, but their mission that I can get behind is a world without Alzheimer's. So everything I'm doing, if I'm an employee, that's why I'm doing it. I think we lack that. And then I think there's a sense of belonging, that a group that is connected. I had a good friend of mine. He passed away recently. Led a very full life, was one of the first swine veterinarians to understand production medicine and going from single site to multi-site and prospered from that. But his comment was, it's not about belongings, it's about belonging. It's not about what we have, it's about how do we feel that we're part of this tribe. If I feel like I'm part of a group, that I'm a valued part of the group, and the reason I feel valued is because my supervisor acknowledges me. And I can spend a day just talking about proper ways to acknowledge, but it comes down to an acknowledgement is, as the person that God acknowledged, did I tell anybody? Mm-hmm. Did I go home and tell my wife? Did I tell my kids? Did I tell my buddies that when I'm on the golf course that I got acknowledged? And it doesn't have to be anything formal. It doesn't have to be a pay raise. It doesn't have to be a bonus. It's, did my boss notice and did they express appreciation to the degree that I told somebody? And when that takes place, the brain chemicals are just fascinating. Dopamine and oxytocin and serotonin. When we kick those loose, that's what causes the warm, fuzzy feeling that we get when somebody acknowledges us, especially if we're not expecting it. If we're expecting it, then it almost has a negative effect that, well, yeah, I knew you were going to say that anyway. And when we've got a group that is getting that acknowledgement, again, I'm not lowering my expectations. I'm making that very clear. This is a target we have to hit, period. I will help you hit that target. I will figure out the resource allocation. I'll take something off your plate if that's what's necessary for you to hit that target, but that has to be hit. So I hold them completely accountable. But when they hit it, it's my job to prepare them to be able to hit that, to provide them that their natural abilities come out. But then I'm not going to take any credit for hitting that target. I'm going to give the credit to the individuals that came up with that. Gallup came out with some research that said, if that's the case, it's going to take a 25% pay raise to get me to even consider leaving a company that I know my work will be rewarded and I feel like I'm part of a team.
Well, putting that into practice, I say both of you have been excellent guests in this podcast so far. May I say even the best. So, but that might already help. But I think those are 2 points that you mentioned that are good. On one hand, just giving them a sense of belonging, and as well spending attention in the right proportion to learning. Iris, do you have a question as well? I think so.
Well, I was wondering, what are new hires seeking specifically?
Yeah, great question. And as someone that's in the middle of the boomer generation, what I expected when I started work was not the same as what new hires are expecting right now. I've taught for the last 29 years. I've taught the second years, third years, and then I have a week-long um, module with the seniors right before they graduate on business and preparing them. And one of the things I do is they prepare their resume and then I edit it for them. And I require that they put an objective statement on the very first line that the readers of the resume, it tells them whether there's a potential fit and whether they want to continue to read or not. And reading those objective statements, it's became really clear within veterinary medicine anyway, but I think it's applicable to all the industries that we deal with. What they're looking for, they use the word mentoring. And my comeback to them as somebody of my generation would look at mentoring as weakness, that you need your hand held. And the students are very quick to say, that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a company, I'm looking for individuals that will invest in me. And they're very particular. They say, to invest in me so that I can meet their expectations. That's coaching.
Well, that's very well put.
And it's from seniors in veterinary school, not from me. I just tagged that said, and so my comeback is don't talk about mentoring, because mentoring a lot of times that's somebody that doles out words of wisdom. I'm a mentor. The coach is somebody that gets down in the arena with them and gets their hands dirty. But again, if I know if I made it clear what the expectations are, and the students are saying, invest in me so that I can meet those expectations, they want coaching, and they crave that. They do want to meet your expectations, in my opinion. Some people will say Generation Z is lazy or millennials are lazy. They're not. My deliverables, my expectations are as high now as they were when I first started teaching. And those were Gen X's when I first started teaching, and then went through all the millennials, and now we're dealing with Generation Z. They want to be leaned into. And by that, I mean, they want to be, in my opinion, they want to be given an opportunity to meet your expectations. When Vincent made the comment about how the podcasting was going so far, I mean, that caused a dopamine release in my brain. I literally got goosebumps at that point. You can't control that. That's an automatic dump when somebody that I respect, somebody that is in charge of these podcasts, makes that comment. I will start to believe that. Now, if I can see him and I see he's fidgety or looking off camera or looking at his watch, I'm going, he wants this to end. And so I will start to believe, and instead of dopamine, cortisol will be released. That pit in your stomach that, this isn't going well. That just the visual signals that both of you are giving me is, they value what I'm saying, or I can keep talking with that. The belonging, and then being a valuable member of your team, I think is what for veterinarians, they want to become doc. They want to become the veterinarian. Mm-hmm. When a new veterinarian greets a client for the first time, it's, are you old enough to be a vet? And the second thing is, where's Dr. Larry? Dr. Larry always takes care of me.
Can I propose a little bit, because there will be quite a lot of listeners who will think, okay, yeah, this is a nice theory, but in my farm or in my property, I have a dozen of Mexican employees or a dozen of people from former CIS countries or whatever, with a quite steep cultural difference, sometimes a language difference. Good luck with your coaching. What would you say to them?
Yeah, I would say the number one thing, that your responsibility as a manager is to learn their language. Mm-hmm. Now, you may not be an expert in it, but be conversational in it. We owe them that. When I was first applying to vet school, I asked the veterinarians I was working with, what's the most important thing I can learn or do outside of veterinary medicine? And they said, learn how to run a computer. Now, this was back in the early 80s, and I thought, why do I need to do that? Now, what I tell students is they need to learn Spanish. If they're interested in production medicine, they need to learn Spanish so that they can avoid the translator. I understand and respect your comment about cultural differences 100%. What I have found uniform is we all have a desire to be respected. We all have a desire to be acknowledged when we knock it out of the park. We don't get acknowledged for earning our paycheck. That's why we get paid. But when we stay late, when we bring a project in beforehand, we need to acknowledge that. I had the opportunity to work with an international group one time, and a gentleman from Brazil, when we were talking about acknowledging employees, he said, "Larry, you're making this way too difficult." I said, "Explain, please." And he said, what they do with acknowledgement is the farm manager, one of the top leadership people, and the person that's the direct supervisor of an individual who has exceeded expectations, they bring them a meal on an evening when they make sure that the spouse is there and the kids are there. And then 3 people from the company show up with the meal. And they said, we make it really clear, this is to acknowledge dad's contribution, or this is to acknowledge mom's contribution. And the gentleman that was at the session was the person that was the general manager. And I said, how often do you do that? And he said, I dedicate 2 nights a week to doing that. And he said, not that I'm anybody, but when I show up and the spouse realizes who I am, now they understand the importance that I place on the dad or the mom, in the same way with the kids. He said, I get down and talk to the kids and say, we're successful. We're providing this meal for you because of mom, because of what she did. So that's Brazil. So that's a different culture than what I'm used to. But the gentleman was completely right. And I said, what's that cost you? And he said, the meal is not a big deal. It's the time.
Yeah,
and
the
said,
attention.
Yeah.
And then they go back. I had another gentleman that said, instead of giving bonuses one year, we gave flat screen TVs.
Mm-hmm.
We gave 50-inch flat screen TVs. And he said, we put the company logo on the bottom of the TV. And then we provided a staff that would hang the TV for the company, for the person, wherever they wanted it. We put the lines in the wall, and all they had to do was, hit the button. And he said, when people would come over and boy, it must be nice to have a flat screen TV like that. It was, no, I earned that. My company gave me that. And he said, the beautiful thing is our advertisement, right in the corner with that. And that, if we give a bonus of not a lot of dollars, it's usually used to pay bills. And if that's necessary in order to keep the electricity on, I understand that. But that's not going to be remembered like the boss's boss's boss showing up at my doorstep with a meal. And they make it real clear the whole family needs to be there, because
Mm-hmm.
it's not the meal, it's the interaction that takes place, or the television. So I appreciate the language barriers, the number one thing, but I think the rest of it is, I think we're people in general, and we appreciate when somebody acknowledges, again, when we've hit the expectations, and I never lower the expectations.
I see. Shall we go to companies instead, leaving the employee part behind us, and maybe again, just like with the employees, we had a look at what things go wrong with employees and what can be done well with employees. Now let's look at the whole match from an angle of the companies. Do you have concrete examples, for instance, where companies failed to retain staff, and what did you see there?
Yeah, great question. I think it goes back to what we've been talking about relative to what creates employees that feel fulfilled and what creates employees that feel overwhelmed. I think one of the first things that I see that companies fail to retain staff is their senior leadership is a bunch of people of my generation. And the key is not to, I'm not disagreeing with the golden rule, which is treat others as you want to be treated. It's from the Bible. I'm not disagreeing that is sound advice, but I don't think the 3 of us would all want to be treated the same way. I don't think the 3 of us would value exactly the same thing. So as a manager, if I can figure out what's important to you, and I can provide that to you, I'm going to be successful. These companies that fail, I think it's a generational issue in some cases. I was not onboarded. I was told this is where the farms are at. Here's your truck, go. That's not going to cut it now. Some of these companies that fail, and I'm guilty of this, we still judge employees by how many hours do they put in. So we start at 8, but do they get to work at 7? Because that's what time I get to work. And I've had long discussions with my son, who's 38 and in management in an engineering firm, that he says, Dad, if you tell me I'm supposed to be there at 8, why do you care what I'm doing at 5 till 8, as long as I'm at my job working at 8 o'clock? Well, because everybody knows we really start at 7. And my son said, then tell me we start at 7. Don't tell me we start at 8. And the same thing, he said, if we work 8 to 5 and I'm getting my job done, why do you care what I'm doing at 10 after 5? Well, because everybody knows we don't really leave till 6. Then tell me we don't leave till 6. And I think there's some unrealistic expectations on there that because that's the way my dad did it, and that's the way my grandpa did it, and that's the way I'm doing it, that's the way I expect you to do. The question the company should be asking is, are you performing well? Are you getting the results I need? It's not the number of hours, it's the results that we get. And then I think the pandemic has affected this too, that some companies and the remote work is appropriate for some companies. It's not for us in the agricultural business. We can't do that remotely, obviously. But the biggest disconnect, and Gallup just came out with this, only 28% of the remote workers feel connected to the mission of the company. With 72% of the individuals not feeling connected to the mission of the company, I don't think they're probably going to stay with the company.
Do you think that's also like the main challenge with the employee retention, that they're not connected to the company?
I'll go back to what Gallup said, that if I know what to expect and the video matches the audio and I feel I'm connected with the mission of the company, I'm valued, that there's opportunities to grow, that, well, my boss may be demanding, she's fair. It'll take a 25% increase in salary to even get me to consider leaving. Now, if none of those things are correct, that's why we have what's called the Great Resignation taking place right now. And in the United States, they're estimating 4 million people a month for the last 20 months have left voluntarily. These aren't the individuals that we want to leave. They're individuals that don't feel connected, that are getting burnt out, that don't feel like the day-to-day grind. They're looking for a better environment to work in. And that's the big thing we can change as a leader, is we can provide the environment for them to prosper, as opposed to focusing on things that aren't important.
Exactly. Do you think there are more challenges with that employee retention other than this?
Yeah, I think one of the big issues with the retention is individuals are making their mind up much quicker when they start a job as to, is this for me? I've seen some reports that say within the first week, the new generation is saying, this is what I expected, or this isn't. This is meeting my needs, or it isn't. And I can do better with the situation. So I think there's more immediacy. I'm aware of an individual who worked for one of the large accounting firms that said if he progressed the way he was, that he would be a full partner within 10 years. The individual works for a different company now because he said 10 years is too big of a timeline. I want to know what's going to happen next year. I want to know what the opportunities are for the next 6 months even. And I think sometimes we fail to realize that.
We've talked about the employees, and we've talked about companies that had difficulty retaining employees. Let's to close off this podcast. Let's look at successful companies.
Yeah.
What do successful companies do well?
Yeah, and I appreciate that. That's where we're gonna close. Is talking about what I think is the most important part of.
I was going to say, this is what you want as a take-home message.
Yep. Instead of focusing on what doesn't work, let's focus on what does work. And so let's spend time as a company finding out, what do the employees value. And one of the big things that I see is what we've talked about with the recognition that I'm comfortable knowing that, well, the expectations may seem just a little above my capabilities. I will have the resource to do so. That it's psychologically safe, that while I'm taking a risk, my boss has my back, that she will not blame me strictly, if something doesn't go well. I think one of the biggest things that I see, I know one of the biggest things that I see within successful companies is they've taken the approach that there's no they, it's only we. One of the best examples I had of that is when I was on a farm and we were with senior leadership, and there were individuals that were in charge of breeding, gestation, of farrowing, and then the wean to finish, the production, the finishing building. And buildings, and the individual in finishing said, if they could just produce a higher quality weaned pig, then we could get the result. And the general manager said, who's they? Said, well, the people in Fairway.
Yeah, over there, them.
What company do you work for? And they named the company. What company do they work for? Named the company. Who's they? This is we. And it took a while. It took several meetings, but we completely took that out of the vocabulary. And even though the person was in charge of production of the finishing pigs, it was, we need to focus on, and it wasn't his or her direct responsibility. I think that's huge. I actually use that within my group too, that I managed at the or led at the college. I just said, hey, I had this experience. I want to do that with us too. So we had a very diverse group, a lot of different aspects. And if somebody would say, well, if they were doing better than this, I would correct them, and then I would just look at them, and they say, okay, no, if we can do better than that. So I think that's a big part. And then I think the other thing that I see companies doing really good is they view work as a purpose, not as a place. And it's typical that we would say, I'm going to work, meaning I'm going to a physical location. But the companies that get it right is work is a purpose. This is what we do. We are families feeding families. We are a company that is going to build community both within our organization and within our actual communities, within the area that we have the opportunity to raise cattle or to produce milk or to raise pigs. Those are things that's going to attract me to that company because I can buy into it, because it's part of the DNA that makes me want to contribute. And so I think a big thing is culture is what those companies get right. And there's a lot of different explanations or definitions of culture. And for me, it boils down to, what does normal look like? You can tell me you value people, but if I don't see evidence of that, that's not the culture. You can hand me a sheet that has all your core values on it, but now let me spend a day out at one of your farms. And do I see that? Do I see that if one of your core values is care for the pigs that are under our responsibility, but I don't see that, that's not what your culture is. Culture is what normal looks like. And if I know what the culture is, if I'm confident in that, then I can feel really comfortable in it.
Mm. That's a very nice one. A mission, a culture where people want to get out of bed for. I'm just wondering, do people look enough at the kind of person they have in front of them when they're trying to hire new people? Because I suppose that sometimes you have a mismatch between people who could be qualified to join the company, but they're just no, their character doesn't fit in, or their attitude doesn't work out. I think that's kind of aspects that sometimes get overlooked.
Yeah, I think that's very, very important. When you're hiring somebody, if you have done due diligence, if you have checked with their references, and I will get called when our senior students are applying for a job at a clinic, and I may not be on their resume as a reference, but I know the owner, or the owner knows me, and so the owner just calls me direct and says, hey, I know you teach the business classes. I'm looking at Julie's CV right now. Says she took your classes. What can you tell me about her? And they're not looking at what her grades were. They're looking at, did she show up every day to class on time? Did she show up on time? What was the quality of her papers? Like, can she write? Can she communicate? Did she contribute to the classes? And that's the kind of stuff that if we hire an employee and we've done due diligence, they should never surprise us. Because, and I get some flack for this, but I don't think people largely change who they are. I think we're hardwired pretty well. But what we can do is we can impact the environment to where they can be successful. And again, a lot of that goes back to knowing what's expected. A lot of it goes back to so if we get the people that we think have got the potential, then what type of environment do we provide for them during that first week that they're with us? Are they overwhelmed, or do we allow them to work with an individual who has all the capabilities and the approach that we want? We've got mirror neurons in our brain that most of us learn by imitating. So I see you act, and then my brain subconsciously will actually start acting like that. So I may start doing like this because I see Vincent doing it, and it seems comfortable. And so my brain says, hey, go ahead and do that. And now he put his hands down, so I'm going to put my hands down. He's leaning in, so I'll lean in. If we put people with our best employees, that's what they're going to think normal looks like. Not the ones that come squealing in 2 minutes before work starts or always looking, to extend their break time. By that onboarding program can be really important in the environment that we create, so the individuals don't feel overwhelmed and feel like they can become part of the group.
I think that was a marvelous ending of this podcast. I think we've been covering quite a lot of things, and I think it is very good for employees wherever in the agricultural world to consider this and make sure that, do better when they want to keep their employees, and also ask themselves, if somebody left, what could I do better this time? It's probably underrated in the industry.
I think you're right. The challenge I see is leadership, people management is considered a soft skill, and there's nothing soft about it. If you get in the arena with people and really focus on developing them and meeting their needs and paying attention to the issues that are important to them, there's nothing soft about it. But I think a lot of people shy away from it because, like me, I was trained to be a veterinarian. I wasn't trained to lead people.
Understand.
And we spent an entire career, figuring out what's wrong with the pigs or the cattle, and then boom, you're in charge of a farm or you're in charge of a group of people, and I got zero training. And that's what I'm trying to provide, is just to fill in some gaps. As to it's not as hard as it looks, as long as we just focus on some basic principles. There's a gentleman that I really respect in the cattle industry, and his comment is, don't ask a question if you don't care about the answer. Don't ask a question if you don't care about the answer. And he's exactly right. And the ratio of questions to comments we make are skewed. We need to ask more questions. You'll be viewed as a better conversationalist if you ask more questions than if you just pontificate. But we kind of get that wrong. We think as the leader, we've got to provide the answers. And what we really need to do is to bring in the employees, that if they come up with part of the idea, it's much more likely that it's going to be successful because they've got ownership of it.
As my wife says, don't catch the fish for me, but teach me how to fish.
Teach me how to fish. Yep. I do that with investing. I'm teaching students how to invest now and how to work with their money. And student debt is a big issue with them. And so they don't think they can invest anything in retirement until they pay off their student debt. And I'm trying to get that point across. And that's what the students, one student said that on Monday, is, you're really trying to teach us to fish, not just providing us with the fish. And I said, bingo.
There you go. Well, thank you very much, Larry. I know you have a busy schedule. You already mentioned that there were plenty of calls and you all enjoyed them. So I will let you go. We will let you go. And I hope that you have helped our listeners to advance their knowledge on employee retention. So thank you for being with us today. Sure we will.
It's been my pleasure to be with you. You made it very, very, very easy and very comfortable. Thank you.
Excellent. And Iris, same last words are for you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Larry and Vincent, of having me here. As a last reminder to our audience, you will be able to find this episode as well as previous ones through the regular podcast channels, as well as the Pig Progress website. Just search for Meet the Expert by Pig Progress and Boehringer-Ingelheim Animal Health. For now, thank you for listening. Thanks to Larry for being with us, and goodbye.